Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday, Yom Revi'i. Let's light up the darkness. There we go. Who's in the house on a Wednesday? Stephen in New Hampshire, Yehud in South Carolina, Sharon in New Jersey, Melissa in Great Neck Guy in Ohio, Lucy, Minnesota, Paul in the Great Northwest, Bella in Florida, Joe in the Inland Empire, Bill in mid-Missouri. Says, good heavens, it was hot today. Hope everyone else stayed cool. These must be the dog days of summer. Which leads me to ask, what are the dog days of summer? Where do we get such a phrase? I'm sure somebody knows. Let me know. John in Maine, Tom in PA, Spencer in Connecticut, Jonathan in LA. Hi, I'm in Florida. Elle is with us. Marjorie in Georgia. Rochelle in Central California. Marie in Freeport. Lorraine in Texas. Welcome, everybody. At least if it's a dog day of summer, we have a mercifully short daf. Let's get to it. We picked this up on 39b, continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 2. Here in chapter 3, and this is about the one lodging a protest, the former owner of a piece of property saying, hey, somebody who's occupying my house or my field or my olive press, I didn't sell it to him, it's still mine, right? And so he said that if that guy occupies it for 3 years without a protest, so then he has a presumption of ownership, and this former owner is going to have to prove that the guy who's occupying his land for 3 years in a row is actually there unlawfully. Now, the former owner has the burden of proof, and it might be a tough burden of proof. Whereas, if he lodges his protest within those 3 years, then there is no presumption of ownership that transfers to the new guy, the guy in possession of the property. And because of this protest, now the guy who's sitting on the property, he'll have the burden of proof to show that he is legally there. But as we started talking about yesterday, what constitutes a valid burden of proof? This can depend on what are the circumstances, what region was the protest lodged in, was it done in front of 2 witnesses or 3, was it written down, all kinds of things. So we continue this discussion. The Gemara relates an incident. Gidol bar Minyumi had a protest to lodge with regard to his property, right? So he's the former owner. He says he's still the owner and somebody else is living there. So he wants to lodge a protest. And he found Rav Huna and Chia bar Rav and Rav Chilkiah bar Tuvi who were sitting. And he protested before them. So 3 witnesses, and in this case, 3 sages. And he lodged his protest in front of them. After a year, he came to them again in order to lodge a protest. And they said to him, you do not need to do this again. This is what Rav says. Once the owner protested in the first year, he no longer needs to protest. And there are those who say that Chia bar Rav said to him, not in the name of Rav, that once the owner protested in the first year, he no longer needs to protest. And that is so. Once he has lodged a protest, he doesn't have to keep repeating his protest. The caveat to that might be, okay, he lodged his protest and then nothing happened and the guy kept living there for another 3 years after the protest. So he had an unbroken 3 years even after the protest was lodged. Then it might be a problem. A further problem might be that the one who lodges a protest comes and lodges another protest a year later, but the story that he tells in his second protest is different than the story he tells in his first protest, right? Maybe in his first protest he says, I borrowed money and I let that guy harvest the produce from my land. And that's why he's there. He's not the new owner. And then a year later, he comes and says, yeah, the reason that guy is farming on my land is because I rented it out to him as a sharecropper. Now, those are two different claims. They're contradictory. And so the second would negate the first. Okay, let's keep reading. Now, Reish Lakish says, in the name of Bar Kapara, and he needs to protest at the end of each and every period of 3 years. Right? This is the same as what I said before. If you lodge a protest, but then it never becomes a litigation, and then 3 years uninterrupted with any other protest pass, well, then there was no protest within that 3-year period. So Reish Lakish is just saying that you have to have a protest within every 3-year period in order to keep that protest alive. Really what you want to do is lodge the protest, get back there and start the litigation. But if you didn't start the litigation to keep the protest alive, it has to be done at least once in every 3 years. Now, Rabbi Yochanan expressed surprise at this ruling of Reish Lakish and said, but does a robber have the ability to establish the presumption of ownership? Once the owner lodged one protest, he demonstrated that the one in possession of the land is occupying it unlawfully. Therefore, the possessor should never be able to establish the presumption of ownership. In other words, why does he have to lodge a new protest every 3 years? Once he lodges one, if that same person is still on the property, doesn't matter how many years passed. He's there. It shows that because of this protest that he's there unlawfully. So why should 3 years without a further protest establish a presumption of ownership for him? He's already been characterized as a robber. And the Gemara clarifies, does it enter your mind that the possessor has actually been characterized legally as a robber? No evidence has been put forward other than this protest. And that protest by the prior owner. We haven't litigated that protest. So rather, amend his question as follows. Does one who is akin to a robber, right? One who has been accused of being a robber, does he have the ability to establish the presumption of ownership? And Rava says that the halacha is, the owner needs to protest at the end of each and every 3-year period, every 3 years, like I said before. And Bar Kapara teaches if the owner protested, returned and protested, and then returned and protested, if when he protested the later times, his protest was based on the same claim as the initial claim, then the possessor never can take on a presumptive ownership. But if the later protests were not based on the same claim as the initial protest, the possessor has presumptive ownership since each time the owner advanced a new claim, he thereby nullified his earlier claims. And if he nullified his earlier claims, then you could look back that there was a 3-year period in which the possessor possessed that land without a valid claim. And even if there was a claim lodged, but it was later negated because the former owner changed his story, then he might actually create an earlier 3-year period where the one who possessed the house was in possession without a protest for 3 years. And so then the possessor has the presumptive ownership, and the prior owner will have to meet the burden of proof in order to dislodge him. New subject. Rava says that Rav Nachman says a protest can be lodged in the presence of 2 witnesses. Now we're on page 40a. And the prior owner does not need to say to the witnesses, write a document detailing the protest. They can write one even absent a directive. In other words, it has to be written. A statement has to be written that these witnesses received a protest. But if the guy lodging the protest fails to say to the witnesses, write this down, that doesn't negate the protest as long as it is written, right? It has to get finally written, but the witnesses can take it on themselves to do that. Not only that, the protest can be lodged in front of one witness, let's say on Monday, and a second witness on Tuesday, and then those 2 witnesses, even though they didn't hear the statement together, they can get together and say, did he say the same thing to you that he said to me? Yes? Okay, that's a valid protest. Let's write it down, and his protest will be lodged. So that was a statement of Rava in the name of Rav Nachman. And now Rava, in the name of Rav Nachman, will say a few other legal rulings that are not related to establishing a presumption of ownership in a piece of real property. They're related in terms of somebody lodging a formal statement before witnesses or before a court, but it doesn't have to be about the purchase and sale of a piece of land. So similarly, says Rava in the name of Rav Nachman, one who desires to state a declaration preemptively invalidating a bill of sale by notifying the court that it was executed under duress needs to state the declaration in the presence of two witnesses, and he does not need to say to them, write a document detailing the declaration. They can write one even absent a directive. So this is the sort of thing where you're being bullied, right? Some powerful person in the neighborhood or in your town is forcing you to sell a piece of property to him, and you can't get out of it. You know, somebody else might get hurt. You're under duress. So you're not willingly selling it to that person, but neither can you get out of going through this charade. It's a charade because you're not willingly selling it, but you want it known that it's a charade. And so you say to two witnesses before you go and enter into that false purchase and sale that I don't want to sell. I'm being forced to do this. I have to do this to, save my brother from a foreclosure, or to save my sister from, a terrible marriage she doesn't want to enter into. There's some kind of a neighborhood bully who's throwing his weight around. So he says to the witnesses, I'm doing this under duress. Later, that purchase and sale, if it's litigated, will be found to be not a purchase and sale because of this earlier preemptive declaration. But of course, he has to make that preemptive declaration as a legal statement before witnesses who write it down. He doesn't have to tell them to write it down, but they do have to write it down. So even if he didn't instruct them, they write down what they heard from him. Now, Rava has a few additional laws that he gives in the name of Rav Nachman. An admission of a monetary obligation needs to be stated in the presence of two witnesses, and in this case, the one stating the admission needs to say to the witnesses, write a document detailing the admission, because this document is to his detriment. They may not write one absent the directive, right? So I owe you money, and I admit it, and then you say, Sal, I know you're admitting it to me, but I need you to admit it in the presence of witnesses. So we bring two witnesses, and I say, yes, I owe you money. And then you say to me, that's not good enough, Sal. You have to tell the witnesses to write down that you admit that I owe you money. And then I tell them, okay, write it down. And then it's a valid admission of a monetary obligation because I admitted it in the presence of witnesses, and I told the witnesses to write it down. Then it becomes a legal document that's binding. Next law. Acquisition by means of a symbolic act utilizing a cloth, right? This is a kinyan, a formal act of acquisition. This needs to be done in the presence of two witnesses, and the parties do not need to say to the witnesses, write a document detailing the acquisition. They can write one even absent that directive. What is this? I'm selling you a field. You give me the money. We do it in front of witnesses. Can one of us hand a field over to the other? No. So we exchange a handkerchief in the presence of the witnesses. They will remember and say they finalized the deal, and then one handed a handkerchief over to the other as a kinyan, as a formal act of acquisition, to symbolize that both of them were satisfied with the purchase and sale of that piece of land. Because the whole point of transferring the handkerchief is to finalize the deal, we don't have to direct the witnesses to write it down. They can just write it down without being directed. And finally, ratification of legal documents needs to be done by means of three people. Why? Because ratification of a legal document, that is a formal legal procedure that's only done by a court. What constitutes a court? 3 people, and really 3 qualified people. They don't necessarily have to be learned poskening rabbis, but they have to be familiar enough with the law and with the signatures and the documents that they have the legal, wisdom and capacity to ratify a document. And since that is a court acting to ratify it, that requires 3 people. Now, the Gemara presents a mnemonic for the cases that we just named. Mem, mem, hey, kuf. Right, mem is maha, protest. Mem is declaration. The word is moda. Hey, this is an admission, hoda. And kuf, acquisition. Kuf is the first letter of kinyan. Now, Rava now discusses the statement of Rav Nachman that he quoted. So Rava said, if any part of this statement is difficult to me, this is what is difficult to me. This acquisition, what is it like? If it is like an act of the court, well, then it should require 3 witnesses for it to take effect, right? This kinyan, the transfer of the handkerchief to symbolize finalizing the deal when we're buying and selling a piece of land. So if this is like an act of the court, it should require 3 witnesses for it to take effect. If it is not like an act of the court, why does he not have to say to the witnesses that they should write the document detailing the acquisition? Isn't transferring an item to another tantamount to admitting a monetary obligation, which is to the detriment of one of the parties, and therefore he should have to direct the witnesses to write it down, or they don't write it down, and it's not a fully realized transfer. After Rava raised the dilemma, he resolved it himself. Actually, it is not considered like an act of the court. And here, what is the reason that he does not have to direct the witnesses to write it down? It is due to the fact that a record of an unspecified acquisition is ready to be written, meaning the symbolic act of acquisition, the transfer of the handkerchief, indicates one's intention to do everything possible to finalize the transaction as soon as possible without waiting for the actual transfer of the item, meaning the field. Therefore, it is assumed that the parties would desire that a document be written, and no explicit authorization to write such a document is required. New subject. The Gemara discusses the laws of a preemptive declaration. The one who's saying, yeah, I'm going to go through the charade of selling my field to that guy, but it's under duress. I don't want to sell it to him, and I want you to know that this is under duress, and I'm not willingly selling this field. So the laws of the preemptive declaration, Rabba and Rav Yosef both say, we write a preemptive declaration only concerning one who does not generally listen to and implement the judgment of the court. In such a case, there is no recourse other than to write a presumptive declaration on behalf of the seller, nullifying the transaction. If the buyer would be willing to listen to the court, the seller is expected to deal with the matter in court rather than participating in the sale, the charade of the sale, and writing a preemptive declaration. Right? You're only doing this because we have a suspicion that the bully who's throwing his weight around will never listen to the court. Abaye and Rava both say a preemptive declaration may be written even concerning someone who is law-abiding, such as for me or for you, meaning fellow sages. Why? Because not every issue can be settled through the courts. And the sages of Nehardea say any preemptive declaration that does not have written in it the formulation, we are aware of so-and-so's duress, i.e., we are aware of the nature of the coercion that forced him to enter this arrangement against his will. If it doesn't say that, then it's not a valid preemptive declaration. Now we're on page 40b. For what type of transaction is the preemptive declaration being stated? If one were to say that it is a preemptive declaration for a bill of divorce or for a gift, well, then the preemptive declaration is merely revealing the matter. Since these actions can't take place unless he desires it, it is sufficient that he stated that he does not desire them, and he need not specify a particular reason for nullifying them. He doesn't have to say that he's under duress. A husband who doesn't want to give his wife a get, once he reveals that I'm not doing this willingly, he doesn't have to say why he's going through the charade, but it's not a valid get. Likewise, nobody has to give a gift to another person. Once he says, I'm not doing this willingly, whatever action comes next is meaningless because a gift has to be given willingly. So when do we say this preemptive declaration? For purchase and sale. Not for get, not for gift. It's only in the context of a purchase and sale. And if it is for a sale, but doesn't Rava say we do not write a preemptive declaration for a sale? And the Gemara answers, actually, we are talking about a sale, as Rava concedes in a case where one was compelled to act due to a threat of monetary loss, as with the incident of the orchard, as with the incident of the orchard, this is where it could come up. So what was that incident? We've covered this one before. There was a certain man who mortgaged his orchard to another for 3 years. Right? In other words, somebody borrowed money, and in order to pay back the money, he didn't say, I'll pay you back this much cash over 3 years. Rather, he said, you can take control of my orchard, harvest the orchard for 3 years, and that will satisfy the debt that I owe to you. Since that lender is now going to be possessing that orchard for 3 years, he could claim that he has a presumption of ownership. Now, how did he get that orchard? Through a loan, not a purchase and sale. But since he's effectively occupying it for 3 years, and the document that attests to the arrangement, the loan, right? What's the document of a loan? It's a promissory note. And who holds the promissory note? The lender, until the debt is paid off. So if the lender, who's now occupying the orchard for 3 years, decides to suppress the promissory note, hides it, then when somebody comes along and says, what are you doing here on this land? He says, well, I bought it. I'm here for 3 years. I own it. Prove that I don't. Right? And the burden of proof would now rest on the actual owner. So it's against this kind of a situation that we now read. There was a certain man who mortgaged his orchard to another for 3 years. After he worked and profited it for 3 years, for the 3 years necessary to establish a presumption of ownership, he said, if you sell the orchard to me, right, the lender says, if you sell it to me, all is well. I'll keep it. And if not, then I will suppress the mortgage document and I will say that this land is purchased and that is why it is in my possession, and you will receive no payment for the orchard, right? He's under duress coercing the actual owner to sell it to him because he's claiming that the guy's going to lose it anyway, so he might as well sell it and get some money. In a case like this, we write a preemptive declaration, right? Because the actual owner who you borrowed money and doesn't want to sell it, but now he's being forced to sell through this arrangement, he could go to his friends, 2 witnesses, and say, I don't want to sell this land. I'm being coerced to sell this land. I don't know if this guy really can get away with it, but I'm not entering into this sale willingly. And so writing a preemptive declaration for that situation is exactly the kind of situation that a preemptive declaration is for. New subject. Rabbi Yehuda says, with regard to this document detailing a concealed gift, we do not collect with it. We do not collect with it means that the document describing a concealed gift is not a valid document. A concealed gift is not valid in most cases. So what is a concealed gift? It doesn't mean that I privately give you $1,000 because it's nobody else's business what I give you. I just want you to have the $1,000. I give it to you privately. That's not a concealed gift. A concealed gift means I have a field worth $100,000 and I'm going to transfer it to you, but we're not going to transfer it publicly. Now, real property, that has to be transferred publicly so that people know who the new owner of that field is. If we conceal the transfer, you can see why this could be problematic. So let's keep reading. The Gemara explains, what are the circumstances of a concealed gift? Rav Yosef said it is referring to a case in which the giver said to witnesses, go and hide and write a document for the recipient of this gift. And there are those who say that Rav Yosef said it is referring to a case in which the giver did not say to witnesses, sit outdoors in the marketplace and write it for him. And the Gemara asks, what is the difference between the two versions of Rav Yosef's statement? The Gemara answers, the difference between the two versions is in a case where his instructions were without specification, i.e. he did not tell them to write the document in private or in public. So there were witnesses that I'm giving you this field, but I told the witnesses never tell anybody. You see why it's a problem? Rava said, but a concealed gift is effective as a preemptive declaration for another gift. Meaning, if he first gave an item as a concealed gift to one person, and then he gave the same item as an open gift to someone else, so the concealed gift serves to act as a preemptive declaration to show that when he later gives the gift publicly, he's doing it unwillingly. We know it's unwilling because he already gave it away as a concealed gift. Now we say that a concealed gift is not a valid transaction, but is it valid enough to act as a preemptive declaration saying that the public gift was done unwillingly and therefore that's not valid either? Rav Papa said this ruling of Rava was not stated explicitly. Rather, it was stated by inference, and he did not, in fact, hold accordingly. And now Rav Papa explains. There was a certain man who went to betroth a woman. She said to him, if you write a document signing over all of your property to me, then I will be your wife. And if not, I will not be your wife. He went and wrote a document signing over all his property to her. His eldest son, right, who would be his heir, came and said to him, and that man, meaning himself, the son is referring to himself in the third person, and that man, what will become of him if you give all your property to this woman? The father said to two witnesses, go hide in Avar Yamina and write a document for the son, giving him the father's property as a gift. So later the witnesses came before Rava, and he said to them, the master, meaning the son, did not acquire the property, and the other master, meaning the wife, also did not acquire the property. The son did not acquire the property because it was a concealed gift. Right? He told the witnesses, go hide and don't reveal that I signed over this property to the son. Concealed gift, not a valid transfer. Now, he also said that the transfer to the prospective wife, so that she would agree to marry him, is also not a valid gift. Now, why is that not a valid gift? Is it because the concealed gift, which was not a valid transfer, nevertheless acts as a preemptive declaration that he's not willingly giving all of that property over to the prospective wife? The Gemara explains that that's not the reason why the wife doesn't acquire. One who observed this incident assumed that Rava invalidated the wife's acquisition because the concealed gift to his son acted as a preemptive declaration with regard to the other gift. But that is not so. There, in the case of the woman and the son, the matter is self-evident that he wrote a document signing over his property to her because of duress, as she had told him that she would not marry him otherwise. Now that's odd, right? He wants to marry her. She says, okay, I'll marry you if you sign over all your property to me. I don't know why that's duress, right? That's more like, well, what's it worth to you? This is the deal I'm willing to make, and he made the deal. But perhaps he really needed a wife. You know? And maybe everyone needs a wife. And that's why they're saying that going to such extraordinary, like giving away so much property that even would pass to his children, is not normal, right? It's far more than a ketubah or a dowry or any other type of marriage or betrothal related matter would call for. And that's why they're saying that he went to such an extreme length, maybe not because he needed a wife generally, but because he needs a wife right now. Who knows what other circumstances were surrounding this, And that's why they're saying in this situation, it was duress, and therefore he never really meant to give all his property to her. But in a regular case, in a typical case of giving one person a concealed gift and then giving a public gift to another, that would not be the case. We don't have this second type of duress. So it is possible that it is simply amenable to him that this master, i.e. the one to whom he gave it publicly, should acquire the gift, and it is not amenable to him that the one to whom he gave it privately should acquire the gift. Consequently, an incorrect inference was drawn concerning Rava's opinion. I'm very close to done, so if you've got questions or comments, please get them in now. A dilemma was raised before the sages. Now we're at the top of 41a. What is the status of a document detailing a gift that is without specification as to whether the giver desired that it be publicized or not? And Ravina says, we are not concerned that it may be a concealed gift. And Rav Ashi says, we are concerned, and the law is that we are concerned. In other words, when you give a gift, you have to actually specify, I'm giving this gift, and let everyone know that I'm giving it as a gift. And if he just says in front of witnesses, I'm giving it as a gift, we are concerned that he might be intending to give it as a concealed gift, and if so, he didn't give anything at all. Now, the law, the way it ultimately ended up is like this. If a document detailing a gift does not specify that the giver instructed the witnesses to publicize its writing, there is a concern that it was a concealed gift. Therefore, the recipient does not acquire the gift. This is in accordance with the opinion of Rav Ashi. In the present, meaning now, as opposed to Talmudic times, it is effective after the fact. This is not the way you should do it, but if you did it that way, and it became clear that the gift was intended to be given, then it becomes a valid gift. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 2, here in chapter 3, and with God's help, tomorrow at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, we'll open Mishnah number 3 here in chapter 3. Okay, see a few questions. Bill, they are indeed the dog days, so called because of the rising of the dog star, Sirius. Thank you. I had no idea. Tom, what would prevent the owner from having his initial protest litigated for so many years? Perhaps that he was coming home to take care of some business. He could lodge the protest, which takes, a few minutes, but he can't get involved in a litigation, which might take a few weeks because he's only here for a few days. That's my guess. Tom, is there no way for the court to force the bully to listen? I would say that it depends on how much power the court has in that time and place, right? So if there's a Jewish king over Israel who is a Torah-loving, God-loving, law-abiding king who's enforcing Torah law and is giving teeth to rabbinic courts, then they have a police power and can enforce. If it's a community where the bully who's throwing his weight around is also a God-fearing person, or at least a person who depends on his livelihood, whose livelihood depends on him doing business with the other Jews in the community, so that the court can threaten excommunication, which would mean that none of the members of the Jewish community would do business with that person anymore, then their rulings have teeth. But if this is a guy who doesn't care what the court says, and he's not going to listen to the court, then for that guy, in this time and place, the court doesn't have teeth. And finally, Sharon, some of these duress situations seem like extortion. Is there any regulations that reference this? For sure, that we have just laws generally that somebody who's forced to, enter into an arrangement, enter into an agreement, compelled to buy, compelled to sell, compelled to admit, compelled to confess under duress, he hasn't said anything, hasn't sold anything, hasn't bought anything. But nevertheless, there may be other powers, functioning in that locality, including secular courts, of a corrupt king. I mean, think about there is a Jewish community in Iran right now, right? I mean, please God, watch over that community. Most of the time, they don't have much trouble. But I mean, there are thousands of Jews living in Iran. You can bet that when they have legal issues among themselves between Jews, they deal with that privately, right? And somebody who takes another member of the community, into a court run by the Ayatollahs, problematic situation, to say the least. So that's what I've got for us today. Regarding what's going on in Israel and Iran right now, I think that what happened yesterday was fantastic news, in that savage murderers responsible for so many deaths were brought to justice and executed by the army of Israel. And Iran has threatened massive retaliation. Please God, may we only hear good news. These hostilities, obviously, I think all Jews around the world are very worried about what's going on in Israel. But, the future of the Jewish people is always in God's hands. That doesn't absolve us from doing our part. So let's do what we can, spreading news, spreading awareness, but especially let's daven. Join me, please God. Keep the Jewish people, both in the land of Israel and throughout the world, safe. May we soon see a day with a secure and lasting peace for Eretz Yisrael and Am Yisrael. May these troubles pass. May the Jewish community and all the freedom-loving people of Iran be blessed with a change in that government, that oppressive, wicked regime that is constantly looking to destroy Israel. May they be shoved out of power, and may the day come, speedily and soon. And we say, Amen.